I'd like to go ahead and introduce Russell Vare. He's the Director of Business Development at NUVVE, and NUVVE has been doing lots of exciting work on vehicle-to-grid charging. So, Russell?
Thanks, Tyson. Thanks for the opportunity to present. It's been fun to join this organization. I moved to San Diego last year for NUVVE, and was great to find this event. So thanks to CSE for hosting this. This is really impressive. Before NUVVE, I've been in the automotive industry. I was at Nissan and Mercedes-Benz the last 9 years working on vehicle-to-grid and battery second life. So really love this stuff. I could talk about it all night, but I'll try and keep this to about 20 minutes. But before we dive into how do I back up my house with my car, I just wanted to kind of take a step back and try and get a little bit global, a little bit high level of kind of why vehicle grid integration is important. And there's really two major shifts happening right now, right? You have the automotive industry that's going through a very big transformation and electrification. And then you have the utility industry that's going through this change in distributed energy and renewables. And if you look, I think everyone in this room, I don't need to convince you that electrification of vehicles is coming very fast. I mean, we see a lot of, this is an example of one data point where by 2035, half of all new vehicle sales will be electric globally. See a really big tipping point happening in the next couple of years. And then on the other side, you have the utility industry, right? And with the utility industry, the cost of wind and solar is now cheaper than fossil fuels in 2/3 of the world. It's expected to be cheaper than all fossil fuels by 2030 everywhere in the world, with half of new generation being wind and solar by 2050. So with these two big changes, you have a lot of volatility that's coming into the system, right? You have electric vehicles with a lot of power demand that's, somewhat could be unpredictable, could all be happening at the same time when people are coming home from work. And then on the utility industry side, you have a lot of intermittent renewables on wind and solar that may not be available at the traditional times. And so the concept with vehicle grid integration is that you use the vehicle battery as this kind of storage device that can balance these two things and have more stability in the electric system as this industry changes. So that's what our company's doing. I guess I didn't change all those fonts, sorry about that. But the concept of what we're doing is using that battery and then earning money from that battery while it's parked as a way to reduce the total cost of ownership for fleets. So we have, this is an example of a customer we have in Denmark from 2016. Over the last 3 years, we've been earning about $2,000 per car per year doing energy services with those vehicles. And the concept with that is that you can then reduce the total cost of ownership for the fleets, make it cheaper to own, operate, and use electric vehicles with the goal of accelerating EV adoption. So that's the concept that we see. It's that what we're focused on is, with these different vehicle fleets as a way to help this vehicle grid integration and help earn money for vehicles while they're parked. A little bit about the company. We're actually headquartered here in San Diego. We're at Liberty Station just down the road. So, but we do have offices in Europe. We have projects around the world. We just launched a couple of new stations in Namibia, Africa last month. So really starting to see a lot of interest in many parts of the world. And then have some corporate investors at EDF's a French utility that's helping us expand a few thousand charging stations in Europe over the next couple of years. And then Toyota Tusho is a Japanese company that's helping us in Asia. So, it may seem like in the US that we've heard people say like, oh, this is kind of years away. I think it's going to, I know I may be speaking to the choir here, and I know I may be biased since I work in this, but I really think you'll see a lot more of this in very short order as the US starts to catch up. In terms of NUVVE as a company, what we're doing is we're the software layer, and so we're doing the energy management of these vehicles. So we're controlling these vehicles in real time as a way to charge and discharge them to balance that energy. Do it with light duty vehicles, heavy duty vehicles, AC charging, DC charging. So there's a lot of flexibility in how you can interconnect these distributed resources to the grid. And we can get into some of the details there, but what we're then doing is taking that energy and then trading that into energy markets as a way to do the monetization. So we're able to earn money by basically creating this virtual power plant, in essence, where you can access all these batteries, these tiny batteries, you know, in different areas, aggregate them together, and then dispatch them into these different energy markets. So some of you may not be familiar with how the energy system works. There's a lot of different levels of the energy system. There's the transmission system where you have wholesale markets that have different needs than maybe the distribution system, which, you know, we're familiar here with, like San Diego Gas and Electric would be our distribution utility that may have some other services like demand response, versus behind the meter, like at our home or at a building, there might be different energy services. So when I use that term energy service, it could be a lot of different applications, and that really varies depending where you are in the world. What you can do in San Diego is a lot different than what you can do in Denmark, which is different than what you can do in other regions. Just a little bit of alphabet soup, because I know there's a lot of terms out there. I just wanted to kind of explain some of those terms. Vehicle grid integration is this big holistic term of kind of this interconnection between vehicles and the grid. Some of it can be fairly simple, like scheduled charging. If any of you have a timer on your EV and you say, I don't want to charge until 9 p.m. or midnight, that's kind of one very simple aspect of vehicle grid integration, where you're just scheduling the charge. You may have another level where you're just taking a signal from the utility saying we have a peak event, stop charging might be one way, or modulate the charge rate. What we're looking at is like where we see a lot more value is when you can actually like discharge the vehicle and you can get an interconnection with the utility, the same as a stationary battery. So there's a lot more you can do when you can actually discharge energy and send it back to the grid. And so there's additional services that you can do in that case. So I thought I think the writing the questions is going to be good, so I can get through this and we can get to Q&A, but I'm going to try and head off what I think the most common questions are first. I think one is, you know, won't it damage the battery? And the short answer is not necessarily. What the studies that we've seen really are a pretty small percentage when you compare it to the impact of what are the biggest factors, which is driving. So driving is going to have the biggest impact. Calendar life or age is going to have the second biggest impact. And a couple of studies here. One on the left is from Honda with the Society of Automotive Engineers. They showed a 2% impact over 8 years doing vehicle to grid. Another study just came out recently showing it was 1 to 2% impact over 5 years. So there is an impact, but we really believe it is a single digit kind of percent impact. And you know, a lot of that really depends on what energy service you're doing. As I mentioned, there's a kind of whole variety of energy services you're doing. So you know, doing deep discharges every day is a lot different than doing demand response in the summer for 7 or 8 hours, right? So I know there's a lot of variability there, but there is, I think, a more comfort from the automotive industry in starting to enable this technology. Another one is how does it work? Don't I need my car to drive it? Why would I want to discharge my battery if I need it to drive? So a lot of it is really just about kind of timing and how it's managed. So as I mentioned, there's you know, this ways that we're operating the vehicle in order to kind of balance the needs of driving and balance the needs of energy. So I thought let's see if I can, I'm going to try and, if this will work, I'm going to try and kind of show you like a real time. Do you want to see like a real time sample of how vehicle to grid works? Yeah? Okay, let's see if this can work. All right, so this is a administrator view of our platform here. And so I'm pulling up a fleet of vehicles that are in Denmark right now. And if you see on the left side, you're seeing a big group of vehicles. And on the right side, you're seeing just one vehicle. And what these lines are, these red bars are showing how much capacity you have, how much you could charge, and how much you could discharge at any time. This light blue line is showing what is basically frequency. So in this application, this is called frequency regulation. And what it's doing is a lot of times you want to balance the grid at either 50 hertz in Europe or 60 hertz in the US. And in order to balance that, you need to adjust the supply and demand to keep it in balance and keep the hertz at the right level. And so what's happening here is on a second by second basis. This is measuring the frequency. And then what we're doing is we're measuring what the inverse of that needs to be in this green line. And then the blue line is what the vehicles are discharging or charging back to the grid. So you can see that as a group, it's kind of following the signal, and then an individual car would be doing the same, but just on a smaller level. So you can see it's kind of plus minus 10 right here. So that's the concept. And then in terms of how you can control this in real time and where you can start having value of how to control these vehicles, you can see that there's like a fleet manager might have like a list of all their vehicles and how much state of charge they have. And they may say, you know what, I need to leave for a meeting. I actually need to charge the vehicle now. I can't be participating in grid services. So that what that would do is send this signal to the vehicle in Denmark, and you'll see that it will start to immediately charge. And so that will start to drop down and start charging the vehicle. And you can see it actually slowed down. It didn't charge because it's actually fairly full. So it's not going to be able to charge at the full rate. But you'll see that that will start to charge, and the capacity is adjusted in real time to show, you know what, this one vehicle pulled out. We don't have as much energy to dispatch at this time because someone needed to go. And so that this concept is how do you create, and I'll stop this, so we'll go back. The concept is, you know, how do you, with all these volatile assets that are driving around and may have state of charge or may not or may need to charge, how do you kind of balance that and optimize that so that it makes it a seamless experience for the driver, the fleet owner, and how it turns it into like a reliable grid asset. So that's the concept behind it. And one other, let me show you, like another way to look at that to see like how that would work in terms of a fleet owner. This might be something that they would see. This is like a time lapse of a 24-hour period of a fleet of vehicles. And you'll see this is that service I was showing you. This is frequency regulation where there's a lot of energy being charged and discharged. And there's a fleet of vehicles that have their state of charge listed here. And as this starts to morning, the vehicles would just charge up to 100%. And you'd start seeing that they would be full, ready for their work day. And then you'll start to see them unplug there. These black is when they're unplugging and they'll start to leave for the day. And then you'll notice that there's no more really energy being kind of traded at this time. So that's the concept, is that you could kind of, while the vehicles are unused and while they're parked, you could use them for this second purpose, right? And so you'll see that as the workday goes on, that some vehicles will come back and charge up as they come back to base. And then as it gets towards the end of the day and the vehicles are done with their use for that day, they'll have some state of charge left, and then they can start jumping back into doing grid services and be ready for the next morning. That's the kind of concept of how you might have, your car wouldn't necessarily be empty when you come get it. You know, you could have this scheduling and this optimization to be able to make it a reliable asset. So another common question is, does it work with my EV? And so you do need both a bidirectional charging station and you need a bidirectional vehicle. So you do need both of those things to work together in order to do that charge and discharge. But the same way that you would charge a vehicle is the same way you could discharge it. So you could charge it via AC, like you kind of do at home with the AC, or you could discharge it via AC. Same with DC. You could charge it via DC or discharge it via DC. So sorry for any newcomers. I may lose you on this if you were like, I wanted to see what an EV is. I'm going to go deep here for a second for the hardcore people. There's kind of two different ways where you can do this vehicle to grid concept. One is where you have an inverter on board the vehicle and you make that inverter bidirectional. So we have some vehicles at UCSD with Honda that have been converted. Renault's doing that in Europe. We're working with a school bus manufacturer and have some school buses in New York that are doing that concept. And then on the DC side, you have different connectors, as you know, CHAdeMO, CCS. And this way you would actually put the inverter inside the charging station, and that's doing the power conversion. And so you're pulling the energy direct out of the battery via DC. And there's, in terms of those vehicles in North America that are on the road today that can do that, the Leaf and Nissan Leaf and Mitsubishi Outlander have the CHAdeMO protocol, and have that port so you could do that with vehicles today. That's what I'm doing outside. If you didn't notice that orange pumpkin out there, is I'm discharging my car just to show that concept of how you could pull energy out of the leaf. And so we're seeing a lot of in the U.S. There's a lot of focus on school buses that are looking at vehicle to grid technology. You know, they have, I think, I'll show that in a second. Real quick, just on other things that we're doing on projects in the U.S., and then we can kind of wrap up for Q&A. But here locally, we have a really good project at UC San Diego that's supported by the California Energy Commission. We have a lot of partners in a 3-year program that's doing a lot of testing that's relevant to California and testing these different concepts I mentioned. They're testing AC charging, they're testing DC charging. What are the advantages? What are the disadvantages? What kind of services can you do in California? For example, like these cars right here, we have a fleet of Nissan Leafs that have an interesting use case where they transport students at night and then they're just parked during the day. So there are some of these kind of unique fleets out there where you can have these interesting use cases of vehicles that are parked in times that you wouldn't expect. So yeah, like I said, there's testing different types of vehicles, different types of charging stations. So it's very much a research project, but we've gained a lot of knowledge by working with UC San Diego on this. Some of the services that we're doing, I showed you frequency regulation. Vehicle to building is more that concept of discharging to the building load as a way to help reduce the cost of energy or the utility bill at the site. And then demand response, again, as a service that the utility might say we have a peak event, it's summer and we have a lot of load being drawn. We need to shut off some resources. We're testing that service here as well. And one kind of, so as I was mentioning, just real quick, I want to take you through a school bus example. These are a couple of school buses we have in Torrance, California. And we're seeing a lot of interest in school buses for vehicle to grid application, very big batteries, parked for many hours per day, including most of the summer. So it's a really good use case for vehicle to grid. In this case, this was an AC configuration, so we have inverters inside the vehicle that are discharging back to the building. And this is a 24-hour load profile, so you can see as most buildings, it has some peak consumption in the afternoon. And what we did was did some discharging during the afternoon and then charged the vehicles at night. So by doing that, we raised the charging at night, discharged during the peak afternoon, and that's how we're able to save that site about $5,000 per year by reducing the energy cost and the demand charges. So we think that there's, you know, an example of some really interesting applications of how you can use vehicles to help support electricity cost in this integration. And that's just kind of like a picture of the actual discharging. Yeah, and then just finally, I think that it can be applied to batteries once they're out of the EVs too. We've been able to integrate stationary storage batteries as well. These are used batteries that are kind of doing the same function as the EVs. So there's, you know, I think the possibilities start to get kind of limitless on the things that you can do. So we think there's a lot of opportunity here and really exciting thing to work on. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of a flavor of some of these new technologies that are coming with EVs. And yeah, thank you for your time. Do you want to take the cards, or should I take the cards? How do you want to do this? How did I do on time?
You did great on time.
All right, perfect.
All right. So we're testing this out for the first time tonight. So bear with us. Hopefully this goes fairly smoothly, and we will work out the kinks and get it better and better every time that we go through this. So thank you so much for the presentation, Russell. I think that one of the things that a lot of people were interested in based on these cards is the consumer angle from a sort of a retail versus commercial perspective. And so one of the questions is, how can we get Nissan to bring this to the sort of the consumer market, leaf to home, essentially? And it sounds like you have something that's working out there. Maybe you could go over the sort of range of products that are out there that can do what your vehicle is doing right now.
Sure. In terms of like I said, the capability is inherent with the vehicle because of the CHAdeMO protocol. So it's really just having that hardware that can discharge the equipment. The reason why it's been a little bit slower in the U.S. is there's a lot of certification requirements, and then there keeps being additional safety certification requirements that keep coming. So it's been slowing down some of the products. We have kind of legacy equipment that I showed you installed at UC San Diego, but we're seeing probably residential products that would have like a single phase 240 that you could install in a home, probably ready by middle of next year, I think. So I know Nissan has been kind of quiet publicly about it, but they are working on it and are very well aware of it and do have it deployed in other parts of the world. So I would say stay tuned. And I was talking to Larry earlier, feel free to bug them about it. I know that there's been a lot of interest after the public safety power shutoff programs. In terms of what I have outside, that's just a side project. I just import those from China. It's for fun. So that's called vehicle to load, which is a little bit different because you're not actually connecting it directly to the home or having it installed to connect to your utility panel. It's kind of like a mini generator. So those are the other options that are out there too.
So we have a question about what the owners control in terms of the charge and discharge. When you are taking a look at a fleet like that over in Europe, what do you require of the owners in order to work with you?
Yeah, I guess that it's kind of a question on our business model. We've implemented it a couple ways where we can either share that money back to the end customer and as a way if they want to take on that revenue or maybe that market risk of that $2,000 per year I mentioned. That varies a lot month to month over the last 3 years, right? So there's some volatility in energy trading. So it's one of the other ways for people who don't want that volatility is we've financed the equipment and the installation as a way. Sometimes we found a barrier for EV fleets is once you buy 10 of these, getting a home charger is a lot different than getting 20 installed at a site. So sometimes there's a big barrier to getting equipment installed, and we found a way that we can take that revenue and help finance upfront costs for infrastructure is another way.
So we have a question about charging, discharging. You had the chart up there about a typical project of when it is charging versus discharging. Are you seeing that aligns with more renewable energy on the grid being used, or is it strictly a cost perspective that you are providing the best benefit to the owners that way?
A lot of that is really regulatory driven. So that example I was showing you in Denmark, it's a pretty unique case where it's fairly easy to access the wholesale market behind the meter, whereas in other places in California, you may not be able to participate in that way. So a lot of it's just driven by the rules of how you can access energy markets or where the value is. So that charging and discharging is really just the way that we look at it is wherever you could make the highest value. I think if you're looking at emergency backup power or other functions, you really don't need to worry about some of those elements.
So with the Tesla owner's manual, they say that if you engage in vehicle to grid charging, you void your battery warranty. Do you anticipate that would discourage participation, or is that something that you anticipate Tesla will be changing as the market ramps up?
Yeah, maybe. So maybe I'll just kind of go off script in my personal opinion, and maybe we could chat after, and we could all debate about what Tesla's going to do. I think, in my personal opinion, that Tesla's not going to enable it because they would rather sell 2 batteries. I think they'd rather sell a Powerwall and a car rather than just a car. But I think that as some of these other automakers are trying to compete with Tesla, I have a feeling they're going to say we need something different. And so I think from the automakers that we've talked to, they're all really looking at this very closely, and some are enabling the warranty question has already been handled by Mitsubishi. It's allowed by Mitsubishi's warranty. Nissan globally is there. Nissan North America is like kind of there, I think. Not to speak for the automakers individually, but I think there's a lot more comfort with this as there's more research that's being done. But yeah, I think Tesla there's nothing technically that would inhibit Tesla from doing a DC kind of configuration if they wanted to. So it could happen. Maybe tweet Elon and see what happens.
So how cooperative are the utilities being with vehicle-to-grid charging? Are they standing in the way from a regulatory basis, or do you see them really getting involved and excited about vehicle-to-grid charging?
I don't know. It depends. Who here works for the utility? Some are much more cooperative than others. I think some are really seeing this as an opportunity. I mean, a couple of examples, right? So Dominion Energy is a utility on the East Coast. They just committed to buying 1,000 electric vehicle-to-grid school buses, and they're implementing it as like a grid storage asset. So I think that some utilities really see this opportunity with electric transportation. I think others aren't as interested and create more barriers and more roadblocks. So it's, in the U.S. there's 3,000 utilities, so with a lot of municipal utilities, so it's not the same answer everywhere you go.
We have a public safety power shutoff question. So clearly with PG&E cutting power to so many customers in the last month or two.
Yeah, I've got a lot of calls.
We are seeing a lot of interest in ways to power buildings, for instance, with vehicle-to-grid charging. So the question is, when you sign up for vehicle-to-grid, for instance, through a provider like NUVVE, is that something that is going to be affected when the utility shuts down? Are you still going to have access to use that power from your car, for your house? What are the interactions with that?
Yeah, I think that there's definitely a lot of opportunity. I know that this has created a lot of interest the last few weeks since the shutoffs have happened. There's many ways where you could implement it, where you could just have a backup power in your home. Like, I think, if you ever get, think of vehicle-to-grid as just stationary storage. So if you really just follow, like, what are the market opportunities? Same as stationary storage. What are the backup opportunities? Same as stationary storage. So you could have just stationary storage in your house that's responding to a signal from the utility that there's going to be a shutoff and it can turn on. Same like vehicle to home. Or it could just kind of be independent of the utility and you have your own emergency backup power. So it's really that the only new thing that's happening is you're just accessing a mobile battery.
So you mentioned a 2021 inflection point for vehicle-to-grid. What is that based on? What are your thoughts in terms of that being the takeoff year?
I don't know. I feel like I should have everyone else in this room answer that question. I mean, I think you're seeing the volume increases. I mean, I think one of your fun facts from a couple months ago showed the Model 3 and how it just really turned into that S curve. So I think there's a lot more electric vehicle options on the market. There's a lot more charging infrastructure being built by many entities, and prices are coming down. And so I think all those factors are coming together to have that inflection point happening. I mean, I think you follow the newsletter as much as I do. There's a new battery factory being announced or new product being announced daily.
Can you talk a little bit about the arbitrage and the cost to charge the vehicle being less than the cost to sell it back?
Yeah, well, first I have to say everyone's very well behaved on this Q&A. I'm very impressed. Yeah, I mean, the arbitrage is in some of those cases where you're really looking at the behind the meter opportunities. So at home, I know I'm on the EV TOU 5 rate here, so I think it's 9 cents at night and like 50 something cents in peak. So once you start getting into those 30, 40 cent gaps, it really starts to make a difference in terms of the ability you have to make up on arbitrage. But not everyone in the country has time of use rates. I mean, we're looking at projects in Florida and Texas and other places, and there is no arbitrage opportunity. So it really just depends on your rate and if you can make money there.
So you mentioned CHAdeMO being a opportunity for vehicle to grid. Can you talk a little bit about CCS and what is holding that back?
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing technical in the hardware of CCS. I mean, it's just copper that's connecting things, so you can send electricity back and forth. It's really that there's the communication protocol isn't there yet. So I think that's the big difference between something being bidirectional and being vehicle to grid. Bidirectional, you could send on energy the other way, but if you can't control it, there's not a lot of value there. So CCS is supposedly working on a protocol through a protocol called ISO 15118. It was going to have vehicle to grid back in 2018, I think. So I've heard they're going to get there soon. So I think that CCS will come around. We're doing some kind of pilot projects using the CCS protocol, so it's possible. And I think once that the communication standards are there, that there'll be a lot more abilities to use CCS for vehicle to grid.
And what is the typical depth of discharge when you are taking a look at the various use cases?
I mean, the way that Nuvi does it is we just kind of operate within the manufacturer warranty limits. So we work with the OEMs. If they say we don't want to drop below a certain state of charge, we would kind of operate within whatever limits there are. I know the Nissan Leaf, you can't discharge it like after 30% SOC, I think, or at least you can't engage it to discharge if it's less than 30%. So it's different by manufacturer. There's, I think it's the manufacturer setting on the depth of discharge.
That sounds great. So I have one last question. You mentioned that there was $2,000 a year as the fleet in Europe that was getting. When are we going to see $2,000 a year out of our cars?
Yeah, that's a good. I mean, that $2,000 a year, I think, is a pretty good kind of ballpark of what's the opportunity there is in a vehicle battery. The things that are going to affect that price are one, capacity. So how many kW are you pushing in and out of the vehicle? What's the size of the battery? What's the energy market opportunity? So that number, it may be $1,000, and then maybe more, right? So some of those school buses are earning a lot more. So that number's meant to be just kind of a ballpark of, it's a real world kind of proof point that you can make this work and you can earn revenue from it. In terms of what we'll get with a SDG&E rate at home, probably not that much. But I think that's why, at NUVVE as a company is focused more on the commercial aspect rather than residential, because there's more financial opportunity for the vehicles. But I think that last point is, I think there's just a lot of value in these vehicle batteries that if we really look at these numbers where we're going from hundreds of thousands to millions, we're going to have a lot of these batteries that will just be sitting parked for many hours per day. And if we can leverage that, I'm sure people are going to figure out ways to start sharing that end value with the consumer. And it may look in ways where we don't expect, right? I mean, we use our credit cards and then we get cash back and points, and I think there's going to be really interesting ways where people can start sharing that value between how we use our vehicles. And I think it's the next 10 years, this last 10 years of EVs has been really exciting to see the growth and where we are today. And I think the next 10 years is going to continue to evolve and may look way different than it does today.
Russell, thanks so much for coming out and presenting to us.